All right. Thank you for joining me again on having a dialogue about education. For the viewers that watched the first part that got cut off, I had some problems, some technical issues with the recording. And what happened was I have an audio only version of the first part uploaded, and this will be covering the talking points that we made in the in what would have been the first part of our dialogue. But we're gonna start off on talking about standardization. And in regards to talking about standardization, I want to I guess get your point of view on what do you feel are the problems with standardization in education. I guess and I'll bring up some talking points as we go on in case you don't touch on anything. But I'm curious what you think about standardization, especially like if you feel like it restricts people's capacity to learn and so yeah, I'd be interested in knowing your point of view on standardization in education.
Growing up in Pennsylvania, we had the PSSAs, a mandatory state test, standardized test that we had to take. Um, Knowing that they didn't count towards anything, I guess, for me as a student back then, it gave me less motivation to take it seriously. I know that it didn't go towards my grades. I knew that, they're cutting out a chunk of the year so we could sit down and take these tests. But also, it was easy for people to get out of those tests. So is it an accurate measure of, standardized learning or what we're learning in the schools, the children learning in the schools? Not quite sure. I think probably the way that the school rankings probably come into play. I think it's probably more about funding and, what school has the best scores. We're top five in the nation, we're top five in the state. It kind of more so gives the district bragging rights. Maybe the district a heavier hand with certain FASOs. So I don't really think that it's necessarily for the children. I think it's more so for the larger agenda.
So so you think that like in terms of like private schools and charter schools as opposed to public schools and homeschooling, like do you know a lot of people personally, and do you have like a good I guess you could talk pretty broadly about like the differences in terms of how well they learned through like how they grew up being educated, do you feel like that you have a strong leaning towards, well, I think homeschooling or private schooling is more effective than public schooling, or do you have like kind of like an in the know understanding, like from I guess talking to colleagues and friends of yours that were in that environment, or did you get a chance to um, I guess talk to people who work in those environments that have given you their point of view about these different environments of education oriented environments, I guess, that have to do like where standardization's in play, but do you think that it varies significantly based on like if somebody's homeschooled and whether or not, or if they went to a private school? And I would imagine the amount of funding does matter because it does limit the amount of resources that both teachers and students have access to, which I would say is quite unfortunate. But what are your thoughts on that?
So I think that we have to break down each category. I think looking at public schools, we know it's a public entity where our tax money goes towards. You have private schools, and then where people either pay tuition or there's a waiting list or some type of criteria to get into those private schools. Then you have charter schools, which are still funded by the public school, are funded by the state, but they are able to have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to their curriculum. And then homeschool, parents have the option to homeschool their kid underneath the district, where the child still has accessibility to the district extracurricular activities. But then you also have private homeschooling, where it might be, again, paying a certain fee, certain requirements to get into said school. When it comes to standardized testing and looking at those different realms, I think each of them are going to have a different criteria that they follow. When it comes to the quality of education, I think quality depends on the person, right? Because what I might find of quality may differ from what you may find of quality. So I think it really looks at, what you really break down quality to be. Um, because resources can be pretty high on the list for somebody who comes from a school who doesn't really have a lot of resources, or extra materials and this and that. But somebody who is used to having all those extra materials, now they're saying, well, my child should be learning X, Y, and Z. So that quality piece that we look at varies from person to person based off of those experiences they've had. So I think it's a very interesting topic, but I think it's also a very broad topic because of the nature of each background, either the person has or the school setting brings to the table.
I think one of the big uh, advantages that children growing up now might have, I guess it depends on their age, is the use of the internet. And I think being able to talk to people online, well, again, age factors a consideration here, and whether if somebody's too young, they might want some parental supervision involved when they're talking to people on servers that can help them learn different subjects. Like for myself, I use Discord. So Discord is kind of like it's like a chat environment. It's like a chat server environment, just a whole bunch of different servers, and it was popular. Discord was popular for originally for people who were into gaming, and there's a whole bunch of people that set up their own teams and clans through Discord on different servers, and then at some point, around I think it might have been between 2014, maybe a little earlier than 2014. A lot of people, I'm not 2014, I think it was around 2016 or 2017. A lot of tech related servers like coding, computer science, cybersecurity, like a lot of servers in that domain popped up on Discord. And then, not too long after, a lot of STEM servers popped up. So there's a lot of math servers, physical science servers, biology servers. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on Discord, and I think for me, that's been a great environment for me to engage with people that are affiliated with like higher education in terms of whether they're going to school, they're a professor or postdoc. So it's amazing to have access to that kind of resource where wow, I can engage with a whole community of people from all walks of life from different parts of the world on the internet. And I didn't have access to that growing up. And I feel like I'm kicking myself in the head kind of for it. I mean, when I was about 9, 10 years old, when I was playing video games, yeah, I could go online and talk to people and play against them, and that was kind of like a not the best experience because, well, for one, I felt like I didn't really have the supervision there, and I was young, and I also felt like I got really hooked in that environment where, for me, gaming was kind of like a cope because I didn't get along well with people in school, and I felt like I didn't have much motivation to engage with the teachers and doing homework assignments and doing getting good grades. The internet back then for me was largely a distraction because I wasn't motivated to learn and engage with information. And now there's just so much the the way the content's presented is one thing with social media and all that, but I think maybe with a little bit of supervision, I think even with the school, like the different schools that are very low in funding, should take advantage of the fact that we can use the internet, and that could maybe help with costs, right? When schools don't have direct access to resources like textbooks and all that, maybe they can access those resources online, or maybe let, you know, with the
But you're
right
also
supervision, right?
but you're also assuming that these people have internet at home.
That's
So
also a problem.
if the district
Yes.
doesn't have the funds, the people who live in that district probably don't have the funds. You know,
Oh,
it might be harder for them, right? We're talking about
that.
lower socioeconomic communities where lack of resources are probably across the network. So, although it is a great idea, I think also um, looking at the aspect of internet and helping the kids. I think you're right. I think the kids do need to be supervised. You know, back in our day, we had AOL, where we could, sit here and chat with one another. But these kids physically have computers in their hands. Like we had to actually sit in a room at the computer. We couldn't walk around with our computer. So the fact that they have the longevity of access, right? They can choose to not socialize and interact with the phone for periods of for hours upon hours because they can walk around with this device. I think is also stunting to their growth as well, right? Because now we're talking about children whose brains aren't fully developed and now are diving um, into the internet in such impressionable years that it can make it hard for them to find an actuality of self and what they really like versus what they're being told to like. You know, all the peer pressures. I feel like we're at a much higher rate because of social media and their accessibility to it. So, is it a helpful hand? Yes, but do you also have to know how to, you know, monitor yourself on it, right? Having that self awareness, or even know what to be accessing that's beneficial for you. Absolutely. I think there's so many components when we talk about monitoring the kids, right? Because time, content, um, are two very different things. So, in our field of a psychology or our therapy, the therapy world, we call certain children iPad babies because they don't know how to interact. And truly, those COVID children who were born during that COVID time and didn't have the option to leave the house, a lot of parents did resort to utilizing iPads and YouTube to now babysit their children, YouTube University to babysit their children. But now you're not realizing, on the other hand, how this could be affecting socialization and social emotional education. So I think it's tricky. I think it's super beneficial, but I also think it's a slippery slope if not monitored, like you said.
Yeah, I was about to ask you about. I think there was a lot of problems when the pandemic surfaced, that kids were, couldn't go to school, and now everybody's at home, and people need access to the internet, or what else could they do to learn, right? So that's a big problem, and that also is like an impediment to kids at a certain age developing the social skills that they need, like being around being in the right environment. So I definitely do agree that has a pretty unfortunate, large impact on the youth. But I think we might have talked a little bit about one size fits all approach, but I think both you and I agree that a one size fits all approach to education, given the diversity of needs and the way people are able to learn and engage with information, like wouldn't quite work. But maybe like kind of having a variational learning environment, or like a like for people that aren't great test takers, or they're just not good with tests and quizzes. For me, at least I feel convinced like that, like a project or an assignment focused curriculum structure should, at least to a degree, work in place of that. I think for people that want to go a certain career path down the line, like if they want to go into medicine, like that's tough, right? Because I feel like, that's a life or death situation. So when you're thinking, when like confronting standardization in a higher education um, structure, and you're dealing with stuff like medicine, that's tough. And I've struggled talking to a couple my circle of colleagues about, well, what can we do, what kind of postmodern approach to education can be done for people with learning disabilities that want to, they want a certain career path, but they just don't, they have these neurodevelopmental roadblocks that are kind of in the way. And I guess, what are your thoughts on that?
Um, you ever hear this saying, like, I had to work 10 times harder to get to where you're at and we're at the same position?
Oh
Is
yeah.
is it unfair? Absolutely. But is it the road that some people have to take in order to achieve said goal? Yes, the reality. So to talk about like what can be done, you know, like you said, could there be more hands-on approaches to tests? Can there be, for those kinesthetic learners, those people who like to, do with their hands, and are visual learners, and are people who may have auditory processing disorders. Just hearing information may not register to them. They need to see it, or do a project. So I think taking into account all the different learning styles, and then allowing the children a variation of approaches to take set tests to make sure that they have the understanding base, right? Because those learning styles, you can have combined learning styles that are your strengths. But if you're just not an auditory learner, if you're not gonna sit here and read the words and retain it, and then Mm, that doesn't mean that you're not smart. That doesn't mean that you don't understand. But do you need to be taught in a different way and given an opportunity to show that you received said information in a different way? I absolutely think so. So maybe if we start to cater tests to those different learning styles, and we be allowed, and may open up more doors to children and adults who do have neurodivergent learning styles or learning processes.
So I don't know if you're too familiar with like special education and people that need to be accommodated for extra test time, or whether they need a recorder in the classroom, like whether you've worked with children or people who needed, had to have those needs facilitated. What are your comments on that kind of structure, like, or how it works, or and if you have any thoughts about like how can we improve special education needs, or working with people, or how special education works now, like what could be improved? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think um, in the Black community as a whole, there's a lot of stigmas that go along with special education that people don't realize there are certain ways to help your child retain information and learn, like you said, whether it's bringing, a recorder into class so the child can now listen back to the teacher and what the instructions were, or what the note materials were in the class, because they didn't retain it the first time, or they couldn't write it that fast, or they couldn't hear the words and write it at the same time, like that multitasking
Mm.
um, aspect of it. So I think utilizing more of those um, accommodations would be wonderful, but then you have to go down the route of the child having some type of IEP, or what's the other one? IEP, or the one, that the medical one. So it's individualized education plan, where the child, or the parent advocates for the child. They have this disability, right? And they need this accommodation. But if you don't know, or you're afraid what people are going to label you as, people don't get the help that they need. So I think, once people get past the the label and realize it's genuinely helping the child, then we could start to talk about you know, the different accommodations that could be made. because I do know children who have extra time on tests. I do know children who would get taken out of the classroom, put in a different classroom to take their test because there's more distractions. Um, I think they're all great combinations. I just wish more people would utilize them and stop worrying about the stigmas associated with them.
Yeah, I definitely relate to the stigma, and my mom especially was concerned about the labeling, and I felt like that in public schooling, I feel like that definitely held me back, and transitioning, even though I did have an IEP and all that, and that helped me a little bit with college in terms of yeah, I could get the extra test time, and I can take my tests in a room. I can also get time. Some professors gave me a hard time about quizzes. It was kind of weird because like it's like the whole point of a quiz is like you don't know when you're gonna take it, and so you kind of know ahead of time when you're gonna take it. And so like it was just kind of weird how some professors were a little stingy about, oh, you shouldn't get extra time for quizzes, but I can give you more time for tests. And it's like the quiz is worth like 25, quizzes are like 25% of your overall grade. And it's like, well, like I'm not a good test taker and I need that extra time. So fortunately, most of the professors I had gave me that extra time. Um, I also one of the things that I kind of liked about DV, about DVR, right? Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services, DVRS. You've heard of them?
I have not.
Okay. I keep thinking that they're more popular because I went through them growing up, transitioning from public education to higher education, and they helped me in terms of getting vouchers for school supplies and books for classes. Like once I went into transition from public to higher education, I had a counselor assigned to me, and they helped me out a little bit. But I felt like it was just a because of maybe the labeling and the stigma and all that stuff. It kind of worked against me more than I would hope it would work for me. But also, I just didn't do well with tests and quizzes. But the projects and assignment based stuff in classes, like for me, that's where like I held my ground a lot better because like it's all hands on, and that for me the hands on makes a lot of sense. Now we talked a little bit about charter schools and private schools and homeschooling. I feel like even with higher education, that this notion of prestige amongst institutions to regulate standardization is also a problem. And I'm curious about your thoughts on like how prestige gives leverage, I guess privilege to certain institutions over others besides just the funding. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
So when you say prestige, are you talking about like Ivy League schools are very like higher class schools? Like what do you mean when you say prestige?
Um, well, I guess it's like the rankings of schools, whether they're like Ivy League, but even private schools and state schools, like they have certain rankings for their departments, right? And like their departments, like they're given a certain amount of funding, and based on how they perform, in terms of like the turnout of how well students do. And I guess that also has some correlation to like the grad those who graduate from certain institutions and they get jobs and from certain, and maybe there's a percentage of these institutions that bump their ranks up because a number of the graduates they get employed by maybe Fortune 500 companies, right? So I'm interested in like how do you feel about like what impacts the prestige of an institution? Because
Honestly, the
for
same
me, I
thing.
find that kind of confusing.
honestly, from my point of view, it's the same thing, right? Because you have private donors now, right? You have private money coming in to fund these programs. So we may not see it on the forefront. I think that's why a lot of you see a lot of kids protesting nowadays about different wars and things going on because they didn't know that their school was like funding certain things, and it was just like or certain corporations. So I think
Mm.
the only difference is you just talk about private money at this point. That's what keeps you see college scandals where this parent paid this person at the admissions office to get their child into here. I really think that it is a money game, a money scheme. I think children should not be paying for education and paying to further their education to then go into debt um, before they even have an actual job. So I think that it is a slippery slope, but I just think we're just talking about when you go from, primary, secondary to now higher education. It's all money. It's just difference of where the money comes from.
Yeah, I think another problem is the amount of leverage that the administrators of these institutions have over the people who are actually hands-on involved with regulating the affairs of the departments, who's involved in those who are doing research that's affiliated with the institution, as opposed to those who are teaching classes, and they're in charge of the amount of students that they're responsible for, the students that enroll for the courses that that the students are expected to get a certain amount of students, I guess, are expected to get a certain amount of to get certain grades, or there's a way, I guess there's maybe there's pushback or controversy about, okay, well, what content should we cover in the courses that the students sign up for, and how difficult should it be for the students, and how much time will they be able to reasonably dedicate to courses, as opposed to all the other responsibilities that they juggle around. And even thinking about extracurricular activities, and like whether or not um, students should be in it, like how do we promote an environment that encourages students to balance their priorities, so they can dedicate enough time to, okay, I have to dedicate this amount of time to the classes I sign up for, but I also want to leverage opportunity being in a university environment to be part of different organizations for extracurricular purposes, and even being able to network with other students, and having opportunities to go to career fairs and all that. What are your thoughts on that? And
So I think you hit a lot of good points. First, you started talking about how professors have, some type of expectation to ensure their students perform, you know, a certain test scores or certain grade at the end of the semester. How many people are enrolled into the program? I honestly don't think that as heavily lies on the professor as it does to the department head. I think the department heads are those people who that kind of comes down on because the department head is now in charge of all of the instructors underneath them within that major. Um, so I think that a lot of the times when said you went to school, uh, we either had like ratemyprofessor.com, or you had to take anonymous, rate your professor at the end of the school year. I'm not sure how much that is taken into consideration because you hear students talk on campus about, oh, don't take this professor, they're really hard, or oh, they're really mean, or oh, they're really this or that. So you know, I think all of that is taken into consideration. But again, I think it's who you know and not what you know sometimes, unfortunately, because people end up sticking around. People end up having tenure and, are able to stick through those things. I think when it comes to the whole balancing act, when you talk about extracurricular activities and the educational piece and keeping up with your academics, I think, you know, you're not taught that. I was a college athlete. I can definitely speak from my experience that when I got to college, I had 5 a.m. lifting. And then after that, I had class I had the worst classes as a freshman coming in. So I had like 8 a.m. classes.
oh my gosh.
Then practice time because we had to go on after the football players because they get priority over I ran track and field, so the track is around the football field. So of course football players get the best time of the day. We're not practicing at 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, was the hottest point of the day. And then you have a mandatory study table at 6 o'clock, right? But you have to eat somewhere because you're dead tired after 3 o'clock practice. You have a mandatory study table to be there at 6 o'clock. So it's just, you don't learn balance, you learn how to adapt. Because the structure is made for you when it comes to at least being a student athlete. I think it gets a little bit more fun when you talk about clubs and maybe the extracurriculars that are not scholarship based, because now it's truly an enjoyable moment. You get to choose if you want to go, you get to choose when you don't want to go. You don't think about doing extra burpees or push-ups at practice because you're late or you missed it. Like, you show up 15 minutes late to your club, it's cool. And I loved those moments of clubs. Um, but I also want to say that I had a different experience um, going into or through my college career. I got hurt running track and field, so I actually ended up coming home and ended up going to community college. And then when I finished out my bachelor's degree, I was now much older than all the rest of the kids because now I worked my way, having a job through community college, trying to pay for that. Then I worked my way through going back to a 4 year school. So I had to learn my balance. That work school balance is nothing, or let me rephrase that. That extracurricular school balance is nothing compared to that work school balance. Like, that's where you create your schedule. You create how many classes you want to take versus how much money you want to make. And so I think that kids in college sometimes don't realize how nice it is, or they do realize how nice it is and don't realize how close that is to the real world, right? Because now you have to show up to work. You have to, do this or do that, pay whatever bills and trying to. So college is a good preparation. I just don't think it's put in the same aspect wise. Like, it's not a clear view that what life is going to be like afterwards. So
Mm.
I don't I I personally would recommend to any kid out there going to school, college, furthering their education, to work while they do it, because then when you come out of college too, people are telling you, hey, you can't have this job because you don't have the work experience. So now you're telling me I just paid $45,000 for a 4 year degree, and you're not trying to pay me $15 an hour, $12 an hour, and I don't have the work experience. So, so many caveats to it.
Yeah, what really is work experience anymore, right? Especially like, let's say, some a lot of people are motivated to work in tech, right? I mean, I tried to get into tech, it failed for me. But I guess you don't quite relate to people that work in tech. But it's like, okay, these people, they have the opportunity to work on open source projects, right? They can talk to people online, they can collaborate with people on different servers, and they could start working on open source projects. And still, like, a number of these people, they get a runaround about quote unquote work experience, right? Even though they might spend the next amount of years, like, they dedicated to working on these open source projects. But
So is there no accreditation? Is there no accreditation linked to open source?
Um, I think it might vary depending on the prestige of the communities that you're working with. I mean, for me, I didn't have the opportunity to really develop experience in that way that would translate to an industry environment. I mean, the work I'm doing is more academic leaning because I'm publishing papers. I'm looking at data sets. Well, I'm attempting to publish papers, but it's a lot of runaround until you finally have that moment to actually be given a shot to, after you pay your dues, quote unquote, right? Because I feel like everything else is a process of paying your dues until you're given that one opportunity to develop work experience, quote unquote. But again, I think sometimes like if you find the right internship opportunity um, or you know if you somehow network with the right people to work with like some accredited or prestigious credible organization, and they you know a lot of these a lot of these organizations and companies they do count that, but it's I think it's kind of like it's tough for people coming out of high school and they go in the college environment, and I definitely agreed that like the real world is like I feel like the higher education environment it helps a little bit because it's kind of a step up where you're not living, most people they dorm or they're living on their own and they don't live with their parents, so their parents are not telling them what to do. They have the chance to be on their own and be develop this accountability of, okay, I have class at 8 in the morning and 12 o'clock. I have a schedule, right? So that's a start to getting prepared for the real world, like having a whole schedule and holding yourself accountable because maybe you're not living with your parents, right? And and you're dorming, or and also some people they wait a little bit, or they start working after they finish high school due to circumstances, or they don't quite know what they want to do and they don't want to jump into the whole college experience too soon. I think it's a step in the right direction, but I also do feel like it's, you know, especially for people who struggle with neurodivergence, it's just not enough. I mean, for people that don't have that problem, like they just have the capacity to adapt because of the sociability aspect. You know, they're good with people and they can pick up things, right, and they have the versatility. And those people, you know, the transition's not too bad, but you know there still might be some hiccups along the way because like high school is, it just feels like a lot of hand holding. Then you jump into to the college experience where, okay, now you might still be living with your parents, or you might be living on your own, or you're dorming. And I feel like for the people that aren't stuck with their parents, uh, because, or the people that have a choice, I would encourage them to like, hey, you know, definitely dorm, you know, like take the opportunity to learn what it's like to be away from the home, right? Because like I feel like it's a better shot at preparing for the real world, but it's still, until you finish the whole college experience, it's not quite the real world, right? But I think, you know, from my point of view, I think it helps to like at least make the effort to be brave and not live, live with your, at least try and dorm, right? Or find yourself in the situation where you can afford to live on your own and go through the college experience, because, or maybe you can balance a work schedule. I mean, for me, I had a lot of difficulty working and trying to keep up with classes because I struggled a lot with exams and quizzes, and I didn't get the best grades, so I really needed to focus on my classes, and that kind of also held me back in terms of being more engaged with extracurricular activities and networking events, right? I wanted to participate more in that, but I didn't want to fail my classes, so, and I took 3 to 4 classes a semester, so.
And I
uh,
think I found solace in study groups. Like the fact that you're hosting a study group now, I think that was my saving grace during um during my undergrad years. At Northampton Community College, they have a whole half of the second floor is a big old study room. So I spent a lot of time there. When I ended up going to finish my 4 year degree over at Kutztown University, there were multicultural centers where people are always studying, where people are always doing something. There's a quiet space or somebody to bounce ideas off of, or somebody to quiz you. So I think I had to purposely put myself in places to help me focus because there were so many other distractions going around. So it was so easy to fall into the distraction.
mm,
Yeah.
yeah, for me, Yeah, I was distracted a lot, especially by video games. But I feel like the good news about the video games is I kind of grew out of it. Like I just felt more motivated to learn after like I developed that that circle of support, moral support. That's like, hey Jesse, I like the content you're putting out, and I like what you're writing and putting together. Like keep at it, stay focused, and that encouragement really helped me get my act together a lot better over the years
But you
too.
know what? The caveat to that is kids are now getting scholarships to go to school to play video games.
Oh no. Oh
Whether
no.
it's whether it's creating the video game or actually playing the video game, being ranked a certain amount in the country, kids are getting scholarships to college for that.
I will say, I, like my experience with video games was it was like a coping mechanism that became like this addiction that led to delayed development issues. And I think one thing I want to see with video games is how can we take the video games and make it so people learn as they're playing the video game, like whatever they're doing, like the video game that they're playing is helping them learn, like engage with the information, the content that they're engaged with. And I think what the immersive aspect of the video game is ironically what is missing from these learning environments, right? It's just so ironic. There's just this crazy irony about how people get hooked into the video games, like just this environment of the virtual world, because it's so immersive. Like, why is it that like even the consumer ecosystem, right? Like when we go shopping at the store, or whether we work at the store, or like even the jobs, the job, the like, whether somebody's an accountant and they're working in the office, and that environment's just nowhere near as motivating. It's not immersive as the game. It's like, how do we take technology, or even the virtual world atmosphere, which maybe that's what metaverse is trying to do, right? Is like trying to bridge this immersive atmosphere that's so interlinked with the gaming community, right? Because that's why people enjoy video games, is it's this stimulating immersive environment. And I feel like that's what's missing, is like, how can we make
But I think you're also pinpointing work culture, work environment.
mm,
If your work culture, work environment is not bringing you those things, then there's certain qualities that you're looking for within a corporation or corporate environment that you want. Um,
mm,
because I think the other hand, like you said, it is the metaverse, right? People really submerge themselves in there, but I think the bridge is making people understanding the value of work culture and work environment, and how important it is to be in a healthy, stimulating one that is suitable for you as an individual.
yeah. And and speaking of work environment, right? And I just even like with the just the incentive for people to work, right? And some people might be lucky because they work for a Fortune 500 company, but I feel like there's this expectation that's not um it's not um I guess it's not pressured upon us or inspired for us to, like, hey, like, you should push yourself beyond the expectations of your boss, or beyond the expectations of what people expect of you, because it's not just about you, it's about the community, right? And it's not just about the community ecosystem, but that's everything surrounding the ecosystem that brings the communities together, that matters to you, right? And I feel like that should be incorporated into how, the structure of education, and also the structure of the workplace environment. And I also have some concerns about workplace environments that try to, it doesn't feel like they try to encourage people, but it seems like they try to coerce people to, like, like people that want to be promoted, in the business that they're working with, it's like, oh well, you need to get a master's degree and take all these courses, and then we'll give you this promotion. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but what how do you feel about that?
Um, I think when it comes to that work environment, work culture, I think I read an article years back about employee satisfaction rates, and Wegmans, the grocery store, actually had one of the highest employee satisfaction rates in the country. And I was baffled because I was like, a grocery store, but it's like the people were treated nice, right? Treated as human beings, and then they also had this model where the customer isn't always right. The employee comes before the customer, because without the employee there would be no customer. So I think also like switching that frame of the customer's always right would really help boost morale in certain work environments. um, I also think that if a person wants a job and a, or a higher position within the job, and they're telling them that they need a certain um, educational background, well, then I get curious, right? What is it that the education now would bring them that helps them to be more suitable for this job? And is there not a test or a training that the company can provide that directly fits, um, their bylaws, or their not bylaws, but their criteria, requirements within the job, right? Why can why can that person now not learn that information from directly from the company? I get curious about. I also get curious about, um, if the education is necessary, are you going to pay for this education? Again, it's so expensive. There's so
Mm.
many stipulations when it comes to that tuition reimbursement within companies. So I think it's a people's nice way of saying no, because I also think on the other hand, if somebody had 40 years of work experience to be able to do that job, they would be considered for the job. They're not going to tell that person to go back to school after having
Right.
40 years of experience, right? Because they're probably in their 60s at that point. I'm not saying that people in the 60s can't do it. I'm not ageist, but I think that work experience does hold a lot of weight.
Yeah, and I know you said that you had to be somewhere by 5 o'clock, but
Yes.
yes. So I guess this is unless you have any extra time. I wanted to get back to in terms of, do you feel confident that standardize do you feel like there's going to be a collapse in standardization and we're going to go backwards, or do you have confidence in the direction of like the funding and the prospects of public and higher education in the United States as opposed to throughout the rest of the world, and how does our systems compare to other systems like in Europe and Asia and all that.
So when you say collapse of standardized testing, I do have to go after this question just to clarify too.
Mm-hmm.
But when you say collapse, what's the alternative if the collapse happens? So just so I understand kind of
Um,
where you're
I
going.
I feel like I think about medieval times and how if somebody if somebody's dad was a blacksmith, right? They would be trained to be a blacksmith. So we're going back to master. I feel like we should definitely go back to master and apprentice, right? You would pick up the skills that some you that you're intimately um, you grow up with a community or a family that has a certain skill set, and like the the environment thereof might not provide you a better trade-off to develop yourself and have a certain competency to 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 bring to the demands of the economy. But on the other hand, I do feel strongly about all these communities due to the internet, to the advent of the internet and where it's going. But then you also mentioned the problem with, like, well, some people still don't have access to the internet, so that's also a problem. Um,
So I think when you say the collapse, and that you are a fan of like the master and apprentice aspect, I think there's something beautiful about that. Learning a skill or a trade, or growing up around a skill or a trade, and taking
mm,
that on. I think, a lot of family businesses, mom and pop, whether it's an electrician, a plumber, whoever, or a mechanic, right? Those mom and pop shops where the children are taught those skills probably at a young age because they're surrounded by that. I think that's a beautiful thing.
mm,
I think, but we also have trade schools, right? When kids don't want to go to college, um, after high school, they can opt into going to a trade school after, whether it's HVAC or whatever the case may be. So I think I'm a big fan of options. If somebody wants to take that route of an apprenticeship and learn from someone who's mastered within the skill, absolutely. But at the same time, I still think that there is that master apprentice aspect. It's just harder to get into when you go into like the doctor side, because now you have so many more tests that you have to take in order to get that residency. If somebody does want to go out and be a biochemist, there are, but there's just way more steps and tests that you have to take to end up taking, getting to that route. But I think in actuality, it is a master apprentice relationship that is developed. It's just what are the steps in order to get there? Is one quote unquote easier to get to? Um, Easy is in the eye of the holder. That's what I'm gonna call it.
yes. Well, thank you so much for getting on a second dialogue with
Yes, thank you
me,
for
and
having me.
thank you. And we'll keep in touch, and maybe
Yes,
we'll have another dialogue.
yes. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Take it
Okay,
easy.
bye.